Hi, I'm Ryan from the Sax Pro Shop here at MusicMedic, and today I'm going to show you how to replace some springs on your saxophone. We have a couple different types of springs that we're going to go over today. We're going to go over blued needle springs, replacing stainless steel springs, and then also replacing flat springs. What I have here is a Yamaha alto sax, and I'm going to work on replacing the spring for this octave lever right here. Now the springs on this Yamaha are stainless steel springs, which are a little different than blued needle springs. We're going to go over blued needle springs here in a bit, but we're going to start with our stainless steel springs. So the first thing is I just need to remove the key so I can have easy access to the spring. Already went ahead and loosened the hinge rod. I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And so I don't lose anything, I'm going to go ahead and put that rod right back in, place it off to the side. Before we go ahead and get into removing it, let's go over the tools that we're going to use for these jobs. So I have a spring hook, set of screwdrivers, a needle file. I have my broken spring removing pliers and my spring installing pliers. Both of these are made here at MusicMedic. I have my thin-jawed whole spring removing pliers, my wide-jaw whole spring removing pliers. I have a set of MusicMedic Duckbill parallel pliers. I have a set of wire cutters, and I also have my Xuron shears. I also have some tools that we may use to tension the springs. I have my spring bending pliers, and then I also have some pad cup and tone hole pliers, which work very nicely for actually tensioning springs. I also have a set of needle springs. I have some stainless steel spring wire. I have some stainless steel flat springs. I also have a caliper just in case I need to do any measuring. I have my hammer for flattening the springs, and I have my bench anvil. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the spring I'm going to be replacing is right here, and this is a stainless steel spring. Okay, you'll notice it is whole, so I'm going to have to find a way to remove this spring. There's a couple different ways. I'm going to show you the safest way to remove a whole spring. For this, I'm going to use my MusicMedic wide jaw spring removing pliers, and I'm going to use a pair of our Duckbill MusicMedic parallel pliers. With one set of pliers, I'm going to hold on to the actual spring like that. And I want a little bit of space between the edge of the plier and the post. I don't want this all the way up to it like so. Okay, so I want just a little bit of space. I would say maybe about 2-3 millimeters. I open the jaws of my parallel pliers because I'm going to use that one side on the post and one side on the pair of pliers, and I'm going to squeeze with these to pop that spring out. There it goes. So there I've removed my stainless steel spring. Now I'm going to have to find a good replacement for this. What I want to measure for is the diameter of this spring. You'll notice with the stainless steel spring wire is it comes in one length. So I have to cut this to fit. So I'm going to look for diameter. I'm going to use a set of digital calipers to measure. Now I'm measuring in millimeters here, and it's saying it's just over 1 millimeter, 1.05 millimeters. So I'm going to measure my spring wire. This is measuring 1.36, so this is a little big. There we are. All right. So we have the same diameter of stainless steel spring wire. I can do this one of two ways. I can cut this spring to length and then insert it, or I can leave it a little long, install it in, and then cut it depending on where that spring lines up with the catch on the key. Since I have the old spring here, I'm just going to cut the new one to the same length. For this, I'm going to use my Xuron shears. I really like using these Xuron shears because it leaves me with a nice, clean cut. There we are. The new spring, which is the same length as my old spring. Now I'm going to check to see if it fits. Now because I haven't flattened one end of it, it's just going to come all the way straight through. So what holds this spring into place is me flattening the end of this, kind of flaring it. For that, I'm going to use my bench anvil and a tack hammer. When I flatten the end of my spring, I like to hang just what I want to flatten over the bench anvil. I don't want to have it be like so. I want just a little bit. Now it's important that when I flatten this, I flatten it into the right shape. I don't want the end of the spring to look like this. I want it to look like this. Okay? When it tends to have this fishtail look, it tends to do damage to that post. But when it looks more like this, almost like a champagne glass, it fits in the post a little bit better. How does this fit? So I feel it catch on this side of the post, but it's a little loose on this side of the post, so I need to flatten it just a little bit more. I think this is it. Now what you'll notice is the end of the spring is sticking out on this side of the post. I want a little bit sticking out, that way when I use my spring inserting pliers, it fits tight in the post. So I'm going to use my spring inserting pliers to fully install this spring into the post. The slot end of the pair of pliers is going to go to this side. That allows that spring to pass through, while this side is actually going to push that flattened end in. There we are. Now I need to check to make sure that my spring is long enough to reach my cradle. Since I cut this new spring to be the length of the original spring and it did work, it should work on this. Yep, we should be good to go. Now, we need to tension our spring. Some keys are held closed, some keys are held open, and depending on which way your spring faces will determine whether or not the key is held open or it's held closed. With this key, I want it to be held up. So when my thumb depresses it and I relax off of it, the key actually comes back up. So I'm going to need to determine which way I'm going to have to face that. So if the key is in its resting position up, I depress it and it wants to come back up, it should face down that way. So for this, I'm going to use my spring bending pliers. You notice this half moon shape, that's going to allow me to compress the spring and actually bend it the correct direction. You can see when I squeeze it, how it bends that spring. Now all we need to do is just reassemble and make sure the key functions. I find it's easier to assemble the key before you attach your spring onto it. That way the key's not under tension. I've noticed that after installing this key, it's very difficult to get that spring under the catch and engaged. So I'm going to take this key off and I'm going to engage the spring as I put the key on. Sometimes you have to do one or the other. Take this rod out. I'm going to go ahead and engage my spring. And now I'm going to install the rod into the key. Now we just need to check if the key functions. There we go. We're all set. And that's how you replace a stainless steel spring on a saxophone. Let's take a look at what it's like to replace a needle spring on a saxophone. So what I have here is a Wilmington tenor saxophone that uses blued needle springs. Blued needle springs are a little different. The tip of the needle spring actually comes to a point. It almost looks like a sewing needle. As you can see right here, this key just kind of flops. And if we look right here, we notice the spring is actually missing. Let's go ahead and take this key off so we can have a better look. Go ahead and take the key off. I'm going to go ahead and put the pivot screw right there next to it. A lot of times removing the pivot screw allows you better access to where the spring is. Okay. So this is where the spring should be for my G key on this instrument. Actually looking at this, I can see that it's actually broken off flush with the post. So what we have to do is remove that broken piece before we can actually replace the spring. For that, I'm going to use my MusicMedic parallel spring removing pliers. These were actually designed here in the Sax Pro Shop of MusicMedic, and we manufacture them in-house as well. What allows me to remove the broken portion of this spring is this little nub right here. This is actually another needle spring. So I just line my spring up with the broken portion, and I need to press it that way. So once I have everything lined up, this slot allows that broken portion to actually come through, and then there we are. So that was my broken portion of my original needle spring. Now that I've got that out, I just need to find a spring that's going to fit. Since I don't have the entire spring and I can't really measure it using my caliper, I have to use my set of needle springs. Okay, so I'm going to start with one, see which one fits in the post the best, and we're going to go with that one. I'm going to start with a spring that is 0.95 millimeters thick. You notice the needle spring has this tapered point. That is what's going to engage in the catch of the key. So when I insert this and check, I want to insert it with that point first. You'll notice this spring is way too small for this post. There's way too much movement here. I'm going to have to go a little bit larger. So I'm going to go up one size from 0.95 millimeters to 1.0 millimeter. It's a little bit better, but it's still too wobbly. I could use this and flatten out the end a whole bunch to make it fit in here, but the problem is the tension of this smaller spring is not going to be ideal for my large key. So I'm going to move up to the next size. I've got it. The size spring is a 1.3 millimeter. You notice when I put it in point side first, there's not a lot of wiggle. This is a good fit, which means I only have to flatten the end of this spring just enough to get it to fit tight in the post. The next step is cutting this spring to length. Because I want to save this pointed portion so that it fits in the spring catch, I'm going to cut the remaining side. But before I do that, I have to measure to see how long. I insert the spring into the post, and then I will temporarily mount the key back on. What I'm looking for is the very end of that pointed spring to match up with the catch like so. I don't want to have the spring extended so far that the spring catch is not engaged with that tapered portion. So we're looking about like there. I do usually leave a few millimeters overhang, but that looks good right there. So I'm going to hold that into place. I'm going to take my key off, and I like to use a needle file to mark my spring. You can also use a Sharpie, but I'll take my needle file on this side of the post, and I file a little mark on my spring. That tells me where I need to cut. I'm going to use my Xuron shears because, again, they leave me with a nice clean edge. Line up my mark with the center. There we are. Now I need to flatten this. But before I do, I'm just going to double check to make sure I didn't cut this spring too short. So I'm going to insert the spring pointed side in until it's all the way in the post. I don't want anything hanging out on this side. I'm just going to temporarily mount my key and visually check to see if my catch lines up with that tapered portion, and it does. I'm going to go back to my bench anvil and tack hammer and flatten that end out. Just like when I flattened the stainless steel springs, I only want to hang over my bench anvil just enough, and it's usually about the width of the post that it's being installed in. Again, the shape I'm looking for is not this fishtail shape. I want that champagne glass. Let's see how it fits. It's fitting pretty tight. Now, another thing to note is this flattened portion of my spring, I want that to face horizontal, with the travel of the spring. I don't want it to face this way. All right? That gives you a little bit of extra meat and extra structure to that spring, and hopefully it won't break again. Now that we have our spring flattened, all we need to do is install it. For that, I'm going to use my MusicMedic spring inserting pliers. The slot is going to allow that spring to pass through, while this side is going to fully press that into the post like so. And again, I don't want anything hanging over this side. That way I have the full length of my spring. Let's go ahead and check to see if it fits. Temporarily mount my key. So now again, we need to tension. Again, depending on if the key is held open or closed, that will determine which way you bend your spring. Because this key is going to be held open, the spring needs to face that way. For this, again, I'm going to use my MusicMedic spring bending pliers with the crescent-shaped jaws. I need to face the pliers in a certain way that when I squeeze down on it, it actually makes that spring bend the correct direction. There we are. Only thing left is to remount our key and make sure that the key functions. Again, I do find it's much easier to mount your keys before you engage your spring. Once I fully have my key mounted, I can then use my spring hook and engage my spring. And there we are. Now you may need to go back and adjust the spring tension depending on how big the key is and how much spring tension you would like within that key. And that's just a matter of bending it more for more increased spring tension or bending it back less for less spring tension. Now let's take a look on how to replace a flat spring on a saxophone. One of the most common areas for a saxophone to have a flat spring is in the neck key, right here. In order to access this spring, we're going to have to take the key off. So I'm going to use my screwdriver. So I don't lose my rod, I'm just going to go ahead and put it back into the neck and set this off to the side. Here's my flat spring. Most flat springs are held in by this very tiny screw right here. So I'm going to use my screwdriver, I'm going to remove that, make sure you don't lose it, and put it off to the side. So there's my flat spring and my flat spring screw. Go ahead and put my flat spring screw off to the side. Again, make sure you don't lose it. This is what we're going to be replacing. When I pick out a replacement flat spring, I want to match up two things. I want to match up the length and the thickness of the spring. I have a few over here. Let me grab one here that is about the same length, but let me measure for its thickness. So the original flat spring is about 0.23 millimeters. This replacement one is about 0.5 millimeters. So that's twice as thick. So this one wouldn't be right. And this is 0.23 millimeters. So this is the one. You notice when you buy your flat springs, they come flat. So you have to bend it yourself. So for that, again, I'm going to use my MusicMedic spring bending pliers. And I'm going to bend this right about in the middle. I'm going to try to match the shape of the existing flat spring. I just like to use a gentle squeeze to give my flat spring that gentle arc. The more curve in your flat spring means more tension in your key. At the very end of this flat spring, I'm going to flip that up. If I don't, there's a tendency for the end of this spring to kind of dig in to the body when it rubs. So I'm going to flip that up, and that's hopefully going to give me a little less friction. For that, I'm going to use our small MusicMedic parallel pliers. Just going to grab the end and just bend it up. Now what's going to happen is it's going to ride on this little curved area rather than digging in the edge like so. Now all that's left is to reassemble our new flat spring on our key. So I've inserted my flat spring screw into the flat spring. This is going to help me align everything and then tighten everything down. Now that I've got my spring installed onto the key, I can go ahead and install the key back onto the neck. On some models of saxophone, they have this little slot. That's where the actual flat spring is going to ride. So when I install the key, I want to make sure that the end of the flat spring rides clearly in that channel. And there we are. Now again, depending on how far you bent that flat spring will determine how much tension there is on the key. If you need a little bit more, take the key off, bend it a little bit more, reinstall it, check it again. For more information on these products and many more, take a look at MusicMedic.